going to talk about a very different subject. I'm going to talk about why people confess to things they haven't done. We know from a long history that this happens quite a lot. So in 1647, Matthew Hopkins wrote a book called The Discovery of Witches. If you want to get a witch to tell you that they're a witch, and usually you need to before you're allowed to kill them, you need to do something to them. Firstly, he said they're definitely not a witch unless they've got some weird lumps on them. But that's not sufficient proof. You've also got to have them tell you. So he came up with a brilliant way of doing this. What you do is you torture them and keep them from sleeping for several days. And people were like, surely this is the only reason that they're confessing to things. Surely it's not really that they're actually a witch. It's just if you do something to people, they'll go along with it because they want you to stop. And he was like, well, when we were young, we had to do things that way, but now we're a lot cleverer and we can tell just by looking at them more. And although sometimes we do prevent people from sleeping for several days and make them spend all the time walking around the room, this is just to prevent them from suckling any more imps, which obviously would be very disturbing for the people on guard. So we've had this problem, people have been aware of it for a very long time, but now he said, we haven't done this for a year and a half now, so clearly they're moving into the progressive era. Unfortunately, not all of us are as progressive as 17th century witch hunters, so we still, even in the 20th century, have a lot of investigations into what it is that makes people confess to things that they haven't done. A lot of this was led by people trying to work out whether or not the death penalty has resulted in innocent people dying. We know it has because there are some people who were killed after confessing to the murder of someone who later turned out to be alive, which was very inconvenient for everyone. But with a systematic investigation of times when the death penalty has either been applied or been ready to be applied, found that about 25% of the people who were about to be executed had actually confessed to what they were accused of. So why is this? Well, there are three proposed reasons. One of them is just that people are a bit strange. We can't really investigate this with science, but you see it with very high-profile cases. So the murder of Elizabeth Short, who was a famous Hollywood actress, 60 people confessed to her murder. Presumably none of them were guilty, maybe one of them was, but anyway, it's just because it looks attractive, it's in the news, people are thinking about it a lot. Not something you can really investigate in a scientific study because a lot of people you need to search through in order to get those 60. So we won't talk about that one because we're not doing psychoanalysis here, we're doing proper science. We're going to talk about the other two types, which is coerced confessions, like the witch hunt before. There are two varieties of this. One is what's called compliant, which is when you just go along with it because someone keeps telling you, you don't really believe it, but okay, I'll sign the document, whatever. And the other one's called internalized, where if you're told enough that you've done something, you actually believe it and will continue to act as though it's true. So we're going to look at this experimentally. There was an experiment where you get people to type on a computer and you have to sort of just type letters as they come up on the screen. But you were told, do not under any circumstances press the Alt key or the computer will crash, all of the data will be lost and ruin the experiment, don't do that. Of course, a minute into the experiment, the computer crashes automatically. And the experimenter comes in the room and is like, what, did you press the Alt key? And everyone was like, no, because they hadn't. And then the experimenter took them into another room and asked them to sign a document 2 times to say that they had actually done this. There were 2 complications. One is the typing task could be really fast or really slow. And there was another person in the room who sometimes would accuse them of having pressed the Alt key. So there would be actually someone there claiming to have seen them press that button. 1/3 of people, even when not accused and on the slow task, would actually sign the document saying, I've pressed this button, sorry, and in some cases, you can take away my money, sorry for messing up your experiment. But if you ask them afterwards, had they actually done it, they'll say, no, I just went along with it, because otherwise it looks like I'm just being a bit strange. But if you start going into the quick typing, when people aren't really sure what their fingers are doing, maybe they're a little bit uncertain, and if you have someone else in the room who accuses them, you can get to a situation where literally everyone will sign the document saying they did it, and 2/3 of people will believe that they actually were guilty of pressing that button and may even make up details about how it happened. Like, well, I thought I was typing this, but then my finger slipped a little bit and I pressed that. Things like that. So you can create memories in this way of guilt if you're in a sort of sufficient uncertainty situation. But of course, what we want to know is what happens if it's actually true, and what happens if you should be sure that you haven't actually done anything, because everyone's typed and hit the wrong key sometimes. So looking at a different experiment, you had pairs of people who were working on some logic problems, and they had some logic problems they had to do all of themselves, and they had some logic problems where they were helping a friend who actually turned out to be another experimenter with this other problem. So the experimenters didn't actually care what the results of the logic problems were. It's just that on some of the individual problems, the person in the room who was posing as another test subject would ask for help. And then afterwards, the other experimenter would be like, you both got the same answers to these questions. They didn't actually know whether the people in question had been cheating, because half the time they would not be asked, and occasionally they would refuse. But most people, it turns out, in these tests actually will help you if you ask for it. So, advice for those of you who are doing maths problems. If you then ask them, did you help these people? Only 6% of them confessed when they actually hadn't done anything at all. But nearly half would actually own up to having helped someone out if they had done so. Then you can change how you do the interrogation. You can act as though you're empathizing with the person who is under this situation, who may or may not have actually helped someone out. You can say that you understand, it's nice to help people out, maybe it's fine. You can also offer them deals. You can say, so I don't have to get the professor involved. I could just have you repeat the experiment tomorrow, and that would be fine. You've obviously ruined this experiment, but just do it again tomorrow. So in this case, you're cutting them a deal. You're not involving an authority figure. And in this case, the number of people who owned up when they actually had cheated went up to 87%. And the number of people who owned up when they hadn't cheated went up to 40%. So you can get nearly half of people agreeing that they've done something if they think they're being cut a deal in a very realistic situation where they're genuinely trying to work out what's happening. Then if you, in this case, they should all be quite clear whether or not they had actually helped them out, because half the time you've not even been asked to help someone out. But then we have the question of false memories. So many of us have heard the idea that sometimes you remember things that didn't actually, the thing you meant to do, the thing you meant to put in the fridge that you actually left out on the counter, washing up that you probably should have done and thought you had done, but it turns out actually you haven't. But it's also easy to create these memories in people. So in this experiment, they got subjects' parents to tell them of something that happened to these students when they were young, and also checked that the students had never been involved with the police, just in case they were actually going to implant a true memory, which would obviously mess up their experiment. Then they had 3 interviews with these people over a week separated, and they would ask them questions about what had happened at this emotional event, such as being bitten by a dog or something like that, which they obviously should remember reasonably well because it's a scary thing to be bitten by a dog. Or this time when they committed a crime and the police got involved, which hadn't happened. They didn't tell them things that they thought had happened, they just mentioned the event and tried to see what they remembered of these 2 events, one true, one false. And by the end of it, 3/4 of people had both accepted that they had had this dealing with police and also invented more than 10 details about how these events had actually happened, which obviously hadn't happened. So when you're going around and thinking about what you've done, what you're guilty of, just remember the human brain is very suggestible, and you need to be very careful about how you're conforming to other people's expectations. Thank you.
Go on. This is how Dan Brown puts things into your mind.
I believe that Dan Brown also uses a lot of cheating and just actually faking things on camera because
They're Brown rather than Dan Brown.
Yes. Dan Brown also uses a lot of cheating and making up things that aren't true about science. Yes.
Thank you very much. Another round of applause for Robin, please.